Welcome to this episode of the Psychedelic Mom Podcast. I'm your host, Michaela Carlin. I kind of feel like the song I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar should be playing right now, or the Circle of Women song, that medicine song that's so beautiful. Because today's episode is about supporting mothers and women in the entheogenic space. It is part one of a two-part series that I did with Michaela de la Myco, who has an incredibly powerful voice. So you have two Michaelas here today, spelled differently, two psychedelic women, psychedelic mothers, dedicated to some of the same things within the entheogenic and psychedelic space. Michaela is dedicated to raising the voices of women and supporting women in this space, the right use of power in the psychedelic community and in facilitation of medicine, supporting those that have been harmed by the misuse of power. She is also dedicated to the rematriation of entheogens. She's illuminating the wisdom of the mushroom and the wisdom of the womb in this entheogenic space. Michaela and I come from different lineages, yet we are now committing our lives to supporting other women in the use of earth medicines and psychedelics, in healing their trauma, in finding their sovereign voice and truth and authenticity, using these medicines to reconnect to their bodies and their innate wisdom within. On episode number 1, Michaela shares with us the Mothers of the Mushroom Project, and I am going to let her tell you about it. But this is something that someone in the earth medicine psychedelic space needed to do, and I am so excited that Michaela did it. So many of you reach out to me and ask me, are earth medicines safe? Number one, just in general. Are magic mushrooms safe while I'm conceiving a baby, while I'm pregnant, nursing, in postpartum, while I deliver, or in menopause? But not just are they safe, how can they support me? What can they teach me? Are these tools for my transformation and evolution as a woman and as a mother? Well, she is going to share what she's learned from the Mothers of the Mushroom Project. She's also going to share her commitment to the Ma'at tradition, which I found absolutely fascinating, and her deep love of the mushroom and all that is feminine and bringing the feminine voice and wisdom to the entheogenic space. So many of the conversations that we had in part 1 and part 2 are so important in the entheogen space, in particular for women. Women are supporting women out there. We're raising each other's voices. We're holding each other in ceremony. We're teaching each other from our own lineages. So many women have been serving medicine for so long. The women who serve in the entheogenic space in the United States today are the women that got burned at the stakes from generations ago, the medicine women of the past. This is a call to other women out there in the space to share your story. For women who serve medicine in the underground in the United States or globally, and who have been, and the indigenous who have been doing it for centuries, and all of us that come with our own lineage of medicine women and men, and now who carry the medicine. It takes courage to stand up and talk about the use of earth medicines and psychedelics and our sovereign right as women to do so in a place where they are illegal still. So for women who serve other women, who hold this space for both women and men to do deep healing work, healing patriarchal structures that have harmed, of the misuse of power within certain spaces, the healing of cultural and political and religious ideologies and dogmas that haven't supported women or mothers or men. So this is a call to other women out there in the space that are serving, that do this amazing work without the support of Johns Hopkins and clinical trials and pharmaceutical money behind them, who hold safe space for others to do their deep healing work. Come share your story. You can do it anonymously, but we are on the frontier of the entheogenic space. We don't have the same restriction on us. We are not as westernized, psychologized as the clinical trials are. We get to hold hands and hug. We get to do it in our way with deep feminine wisdom. We get to include indigenous practices if they are true to our lineages. We get to include cosmocracy and spirituality. We get to include embodiment practices in the space and our deep wisdom that we come with. So come share your story, and I'd like to just continue to include feminine wisdom in this space. And Mikaela does it so beautifully. I'm so grateful for the work that she is doing in the entheogenic space and raising the voices of women with honesty and cultural competency. So enjoy this episode with Michaela de la Myco. Welcome back to the Psychedelic Mom Podcast. I'm so happy you're here to journey with us today. I am here with Michaela de la Myco. I can't wait to hear you're doing incredible advocacy work. This is another psychedelic mom who serves as a mother to her son, Martin, is an educator, a folk herbalist, a community organizer, and facilitator. She applies her gifts in ancestral healing ways by supporting cooperatives, caretaking survivors in her work with Ma'at education. So I'm here today to learn all about what you've been doing. I can't wait to hear about how you're serving in this space. You're filling such a big role as a mother, and then as a psychedelic mom, and then as a facilitator, and all the work you're doing. So where should we begin?
Yeah, I mean, I think as we were speaking before in previous conversations just about the Mothers of the Mushroom Project, I mean, that's ever going, it's ever growing. I'm sure lots of people in your community have chosen this path for themselves or have felt permission to do so. So we are still receiving entries, and the phase that we are in research and development is now actually sharing those stories out with the public and developing our website so that anyone who's interested in this kind of information has a place to learn from other mothers, to submit their own stories, to really reinforce this notion that psilocybin mushrooms might even be beneficial for birthing people at all points in the continuum of birth, from preconception to pregnancy, at birth, postpartum, and breastfeeding. And that is just something that we haven't had in a long time. So yeah, Mothers of the Mushroom has been such a big heart project I've been working on with James Fadiman and other researchers in the space. To be able to watch that come to life has been the greatest honor.
So just to slow down a little bit for anybody that doesn't know what the Mothers of the Mushroom is, could you describe what you have created?
Absolutely. So the Mothers of the Mushroom Project has been a humble citizen science research project that was put together and first inspired by a question that James Fadiman asked. He was writing a book on a microdosing, frequently asked questions, and he is a consultant with the Microdosing Institute, and I've done a lot of education with them in the past, especially around gestating bodies and mushrooms. And so he reached out to them, and they reached out to me to see if I would be able to pull together any research or education for him to be able to write the frequently asked questions around microdosing for pregnancy, at birth, breastfeeding, and postpartum. And the way that I saw him doing this research was very analog. He was literally calling moms that were supplied to him by a psychedelic doula in the UK, and they were handwriting responses. And I was like,
Wow.
okay. As a young person, right, I consider myself a young person in this space. I'm under 30, and I have a lot of touch with the social media space. And so I've had and garnished a lot of following with people that might have made this choice for themselves, and asked him, what if we made a survey? What if we made something that can be filled out in our sleep with the exact questions you're interested in and statistics and things that we can actually learn from, not just ourselves, but be able to give back to the community, because this is obviously not here. We don't have research, for pregnant
Mm-mm.
bodies. We don't have research for breastfeeding, and definitely not during the birth space. And there was a lot that we didn't know. So he, myself, and the UK-based psychedelic doula, her name is Naomi Tolson, I, and James conducted these questions. I put them in a form, and then we started sharing. And we started sharing, and we started sharing. And here we are at over 400 submissions.
Wow. And just to give some of the listeners some perspective on some of the questions that you were asking, so that if they have answers to these questions and want to go put in some of their data, what were some of the questions that you were asking?
What benefits did you notice in your parenting while having a
Ooh.
relationship with mushrooms? What was your dose level? Were you only microdosing, high dosing, mid dosing? What challenges did you notice while you were actively dosing? Did you use a protocol? Did you do it
Mm-hmm.
intuitively? Were you breastfeeding at all while you were dosing? Did you have any support or help? And if so, where did it come from? What benefits did you notice in your postpartum experience? Did you ingest during postpartum? And I think one of the primary questions that we received a ton of answers for were, why did you begin this journey? I think
Mm-hmm.
I was really curious about what was the impetus for people wanting to take this on as a way of life. And what would you say to another mother if they were curious about this? So it's been such an incredible experience listening to the individual stories and also seeing a lot of the similarities between these stories, especially as we examine the benefits. We are seeing very shared benefits, and we are
Mm-hmm.
seeing a lot of patterns with the benefits that mothers are receiving in their parenting and the things that they're noticing in their children.
Wow. And I'm curious, was this a written survey or did you have them record some of their answers so that there's also like a visual or an audio of some of these answers?
Oh my gosh, that would have been so cool. And we are still fundraising for this project. We've been able to
Mm-hmm.
fundraise over $8,000 to like make all of this very possible. And so we have a lofty goal of 27,000. And so we are like gently chipping away at the whole thing to make this a really robust research project that would include some of those like first person testimonies in audio, in visual, in video form. However, what we have is a written survey. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a really beautiful space for people to be able to read the stories of individual mothers and then
Mm-hmm.
also see the collections of stories all together. And the website is video rich with lots of resources and graphics and other great things for us to learn from. I'm grateful to know a lot of the mothers in the survey. And
Oh.
so sharing their testimonies as told by them, I think is a very important step in creating that kind of content and sharing with the world, these perspectives.
And what would you say the age range of the participants are?
We had a huge age range, actually. I think as young as 18 and
Wow.
as up there in age as 59, 60 years old.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Fascinating. Was there anything that really surprised you?
I was actually really surprised at the range of dosing that people were experiencing. And I really kind of like lean up against the trope of the microdosing mom. I know that in the earlier stages of the psychedelic mom conversation, the microdosing mom was like a very important trope. And I certainly got pulled in, being interviewed for the local news. Like this fixation on microdosing as a mother was very important to the general population. But what I had an intuition about was that that was just scratching the surface
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
mothers' relationships to mushrooms. Like they're cultivators, they are high dose journeyers. And so I was actually surprised to really see on a grand scale, like how diverse the range of dosages was. And I was also really surprised at the kinds of methodologies for use that people had. Like, was capsules more common or whole mushrooms more common? So like I got to learn in real science, the behavior of mothers that consume mushrooms, and was really surprised by how common breastfeeding is in mushroom mothers. Some people, are really concerned about the ethical implications of breastfeeding while dosing. And so I will just say with, the conviction of the numbers that 75% of people that are eating mushrooms are doing so while breastfeeding and not interrupting their breastfeeding pattern. And so we are going to watch, mushroom babies like cropping up everywhere, and they're here and they're here to stay. And
Wow.
200 of the 400 stories submitted, those mothers ate mushrooms while pregnant. So about half of the mothers were eating mushrooms while pregnant. So,
And
I
would you say
mean,
on a regular basis, or what would frequency
absolutely.
have been? Regular basis. And
Yeah.
dosing was higher than microdose typically, more like a low dose to a high
Yeah.
dose.
We have
Um,
anywhere between zero point 0.1 to like 3 grams on an
mm-hmm.
intuitive basis. And so
Yep.
that could be monthly, that could be every other week for the microdosing. So that was actually really interesting too, is most mothers dosed intuitively and not on a protocol.
Yeah. Makes
So that
sense,
doesn't
doesn't
surprise
it?
me at all.
Doesn't surprise me at all. And it doesn't surprise me either that they decided on their own dosage. Like instead of the 0.1 or the 0.2, it was like, no, I think what I need is a 0.5, or today is a 1 gram day, whatever it is. That doesn't surprise me either. What's quite courageous without some of the data that we don't know is probably what people would think is nursing, breastfeeding while ingesting mushrooms, and what the data is on the effects of the baby. Do we know?
Yeah, so it's really amazing how little we know about the concentrations of psilocybin in breast milk. There's a huge gap there, but what I will say is that that gap is starting to be filled. There's this incredible woman that I've been in touch with who sent her breast milk in for lab testing to see
Ooh.
psilocybin content. So we're actually going to start looking at some real numbers. She did a number of different protocols. She did high dosing, she did microdosing for a duration of time. So she is going to see what psilocybin content, if it differs from high dose experiences and microdosing experiences. And she's kind of streamlining a way for women to be able to get their breast milk tested at a relatively affordable cost, like $200 to
Wow.
$300, to be able to find out for themselves in their own body. So this is really breakthrough stuff, which is incredible and
Totally.
fascinating.
It's fascinating because I would
It
say,
is.
like, I get a lot of these questions. As I just mentioned to you before, someone reached out to me today and said that her partner was not going to be able to be there for the birth of their child, or at least for the duration, actually, of the birth. And she was feeling a ton of anxiety about it. And did I have any information on using mushrooms or psychedelics while delivering? What did you find in this? Was anybody talking about the use of mushrooms while birthing?
Absolutely. Yeah. One story that I recall really vividly is one that I presented about during a perinatal mental health conference. And they were talking about sex and perinatal health and like the impact of sensuality and relationship with the body as like a very important facet of postpartum health. And this one story in particular, this woman dosed before she had her baby. So she was coming into labor. So she was moving into active labor. And she said that she experienced an ecstatic birth. And that those are not very common. However, she said that she felt really in tune with her body, that the baby came in like the most easeful, beautiful way, connected, calm, peaceful, and ecstatic, as she said. So like transforming that feeling of like pain, as
Wow.
people call this experience, or like this really heightened state of sensation, into one that was even borderline orgasmic for her. So that's hopeful. And I think
Yeah.
also like based in conditions, right? That like perhaps she had already been working out some of these things within herself leading into the birth experience. And as someone who high dosed uh, at my 7th month of pregnancy, I found that like opening up the opportunity to examine like fear and anxiety made such a big difference when I went into the birth space. Those very things that I was afraid of encountering were no longer there for me when I was in the birth experience, because I had kind of released the charge that I had around them. So I do see mushrooms as a potential preliminary measure to things like birth anxiety or even like postpartum depression. And that's actually what we've been seeing with some really incredible outcomes, is like potentially the prevention of some of these things down the road when we work on them through the pregnancy experience. So I've heard record of like other sisters dosing, microdosing, even during hospital birth experiences.
Wow.
So that's really interesting too. And like,
Yeah.
there's layers of safety there, of course. But she said that her keen sense of what the baby's needs were, and like reading the monitors really well and being cooperative and a good advocate for herself, helped nurses even better serve her and her child during the birth experience. So
Fascinating.
attuned moms in the space are very necessary. Like, we want lucidity and mothers that are very present in their birth experiences. And if
Definitely.
mushrooms bring us into greater presence with like the totality of our lives, why not engage that in the birth space, leading to better outcomes for mothers and babies and families? So I see a lot of potential here as a supportive framework for encountering the birth experience.
Yeah, it's wow, it's fascinating. And I don't know if you've had these experiences, but what's coming to mind is a couple of experiences that I've had with mushrooms where I feel like the mushroom was showing me, actually rebirthing me in a way that I was supposed to be birthed. And it was like very jungle oriented, with women around my mother, like touching her hair, and like this entire different way of like birthing in this natural space of earth and motherhood. And then I think what else is coming to me is how many people, and I know you're a facilitator of medicine as well, that actually experience some of their birth trauma in the space of using psychedelics and earth medicines, that sometimes there is some birth trauma, and sometimes that's due to the hospitals. It might be due to so many different reasons, but I'm feeling this excitement for, as you were talking about, mothers being more in tune with their bodies, with really being advocates for themselves, for maybe redefining how we continue to do birth over this process of learning more about this relationship with mothers and mushrooms.
Absolutely. And you know what? I want to just make sure that I also name the continuum of the birth experience to also include miscarriage and abortion as well, and all of the variety of
Yeah.
birth experience, like what we consider as like, oh, this is birth, but this isn't birth. I just want to name that as someone who's also gone through my own experiences of out of clinic, abortion, and pregnancy releases is what we call it. Mushrooms being absolutely an integral part of mending that tapestry, helping me find meaning, recovering, recuperating, and as you said, reliving and reimagining these experiences of what we call trauma and revisiting them in a safe way. So, I was going through my release process and had a gram of mushrooms in my system, and, was laying in the bath and was like, wow, I didn't realize that I'd been here before, and that, my past self had been really trying to send me cues to my future self about how to better resource myself and my skills in order to meet the challenge that I'm presently facing. It's just so beautiful. And without getting too woo-woo or like out of, sorts with things, I really just want to name the non-linear state of time when you're in those altered states of consciousness, and that, parts of you or aspects of you from different spaces and places and experience levels can come to like support. And so I just want to name the range of birth experience. And we also center abortion and miscarriage in the Mothers of the Mushroom Research Project. And there are lots of stories connected to how mushrooms were really supportive for postpartum experiences after miscarriage, for example. So just want to make sure that we have
Amazing.
inclusive
Yeah,
language around
definitely.
how we approach birth.
Yes, it all belongs in the conversation. And it's a beautiful reminder because so many women experience all of these things. So, the mushroom, clearly, it has taught you a lot and has meant a lot for you to cultivate this relationship with this earth medicine. And I'm curious, when did that begin? And how do you feel that this mushroom has impacted you as a woman and a mother?
Kasagamati, yeah, to Los Niños Santos and Teonanankat. And I mean, this medicine has absolutely been a guiding light in my life. I came in contact with it for the first time when I was 19, but I've been drawing pictures of them and beckoning to them my whole life and been embedded in practices that have supported my mushroom experiences since a very young person. I grew up in a Christian dynamic, but the Christianity that I was experiencing had quite a spiritual edge to it. So I was spending a lot of time at summer camp, singing devotionals by firelight all night long. I sang in church choir. My father was a very avid prayer. And so, I'd find him, kneeling by the side of the bed at 3 a.m. And so I'd be deep in prayer with him and in contemplation for many hours in the wee hours in the morning. And we were baptized together and just like had these very altered states experiences through the Christian framework. And so it is interesting coming out of the Christian framework and recognizing that even that was an avenue for connecting with the divine and is like a keyhole, right, to unlocking this other state of consciousness, which is like feeling unconditional love and like a loving creator and things like that. So I had some of those foundations already built in. And as you mentioned, coming from a lineage of folk herbalism from my mother's side of the family, I had a deep reverence already built in for like the magic and the medicine of the natural world and plants, and had an inherent trust for all things nature. And so when I found mushrooms for the first time, it all really clicked in, truly. I felt very much at home in the mushroom space. I felt very comfortable and very safe that I could navigate it well, that it was made for me, that I was made for it. And as a college student, this was my second year of college, people had told me, watch out for having a bad trip or something like that. We didn't have trip sitters and like proper
Right.
guides and anything like that 10 years ago. So it's just like a bunch of college students like, hey, like, watch out, you don't want to look in a mirror, just telling me those very stereotypical things that you would tell someone to prevent a bad trip. As someone who'd been really like harshly bullied my whole life and had a really negative self-concept and like really struggled with self-worth and struggled with like even seeing myself as beautiful and like had very self-deprecating thoughts just all throughout my childhood and really escaped through art as much as I could, but just really couldn't reconcile with this like very nasty voice in my consciousness. When I met the mushroom, I'd realized, wow, like my whole life before this had been the bad trip, truly.
Yeah. Wow.
And like, wow, I
Wow.
actually feel relief. I actually feel peace. I actually feel beautiful. I feel divine here. I feel like I can sing here. I feel like I can breathe here. Like, what a
Wow.
sigh. I was like, I was looking for you my entire life, and I'm so grateful that you found me. I will say my relationship with the mushroom has never wavered. However, the community in which I sit in and the community outside of that relationship has been what I've had to work through mostly is, who to journey with and who feels safe and what groups and what communities feel really at home, what feels reverent, right? Like, I'm not trying to go eat mushrooms and go to like Venice Beach, California and go hang out,
Right.
with all like that was not where mushrooms wanted me to be. Like, the
No.
mushrooms actually wanted me to be by the fire and sitting and singing songs and being in reverence of the stars and like in a very simple environment. It didn't want front stage at Coachella. Like, it didn't want loud noise and big lights, and it wanted peace, and it wanted quiet, and it wanted breathing room and spaciousness, and it wanted, for me, what felt culturally competent for me was not using the English language while I'm in mushroom space, but like singing and humming and speaking in Nahuatl and speaking in other languages and letting nonverbal communication take over and like my animal body take over and my childlike nature before language take over. And so music and singing these ancestral songs was like very important for me. And once I found those containers, and that took me some stumbling, I stumbled around in the dark for a little while to like find that right circle, that right way of sitting in harmony with our indigenous teachings, the land and nature, that I was like, this is where it's been guiding me. So now it's beautiful that I now get to recreate that space for other people that feel similarly, or at least hold space with people that do that work, and that we do it in a communal way and not necessarily for commercial or capital gain, but like to maintain that this is a way of life for a lot of us. And so with the Mothers of the Mushroom Project, it's like, I was given permission by an elder to ingest medicine, but many women won't have that permission or have access to that lineage of knowledge. And so it is a real gift for me to be able to bring what I've learned from my elders and translate it in a way that the Western mind can understand. So that's, why I'm here, why I sit, and where the mushroom has led me. So I just want to name, the legacy and the medicine of Maria Sabina as like a guiding light for me. I want to just name the legacy of the African diaspora, for which mushrooms like really comes out of African traditions and spiritual systems as well. And the lineage of Baba Kalindi E and my teachers that come from Detroit. Like there's such a rich history here. What I love about mushrooms is that because they grow ubiquitously upon the face of the earth on every continent, that each one of us has our own like ancestral connection to mushrooms in a way that like speaks to us personally in our DNA and our histories and the ways that we sing and the instruments that we use and the kind of arts that we make. And so I'm really like advocating deeply for people to build relationship with them, that with medicine, with mushrooms, that is like culturally competent and cares for their own ancestry, because I found so much liberation in finding ways that my ancestors would have sat with this medicine and really honoring that and studying that and being a student of my own ancestors.
Mm-hmm. And so do you feel like the circles that you've created are within similar ancestry, or do you feel like it is a circle of people who are bringing their unique ancestry together in a circle, celebrating it all together? What are you finding?
The latter, yeah. We
Yeah.
have really diverse and inclusive
love
circles.
that.
It's just the best.
Yeah.
Like it's just so wonderful to see people from all walks of life like coming to sit in circle together and teaching each other these incredible, valuable skills, and pulling from the wisdom systems from their corners of the earth. And I will say, like, as leadership and, with the relatives that I sit with, we come from a particular framework. And so we honor that, right? As a person of mixed ancestry, like I bring a blend. I have no choice. I have no choice but to bring a blend and to be a bridge. And what's so beautiful is like many of us are bridge workers now. Like many of us don't come from just one lineage. We come from many corners of the earth and are finding those like constants where everything kind of meets in the middle there. So I'm really honored to build bridges with all relatives from all walks of life, and to also be like radically brave about the things that I'm seeing and in my perspective and the perspectives that I learned, to call those things in when I see things are out of line or out of order, and try to create bridges for conversation. And so that really informs my advocacy work, my work working with survivors of sensual assault. That has been in my history for many, many, many generations. We come from many generations of survivors of sensual assault, for example. Like I testified against my own family member at 14 and like have been kind of walking this path ever since. Like I have a history working in women's resource centers, on hotlines, in domestic violence shelters. And so what I'm also seeing is like as a bridge keeper and in my perspective that like honoring like consent and people's bodies is truly part of how we do this in a good way. And so for me to see it, I cannot turn a blind eye, and I cannot be mute of tongue when I see people that are in medicine misusing their role or like misusing the power that they gain from these spaces. So I very radically like use my voice to center this conversation around righteousness and around protecting and caretaking the safety of our beautiful home in our psychedelic community. This is a safe haven for anyone. This is a shelter for anyone to find respite and refuge. And if people are in our house and mistreating people in it, like, you cannot play with us. So
No.
that's important. That comes from like my elders, my teachers, my traditions. Like, we caretake safety for sensual beings, people that we should be able to like be out in our body and like expressive. And that is not
Be
a permission
safe.
and be safe. That's not a permission
Exactly.
slip. Just because it's sensual doesn't mean it's consensual. Okay.
Right.
So like, I'm asking permission and like, you know, coming to these beautiful people in a good way is like a very big piece of my heart. So yes, in my tradition, we center a variety of voices. And I think at the center of that, we center agency and autonomy and the ability to say, no, stop, no, thank you. That consent being the most important part of the healing that we can create together is that yes. When that yes is there, then we can do the work. But if that it's not there,
No.
it's not going to happen.
No. Safety alone is part of there's no healing without that feeling of safety within a space and the trust of those that are there. Have you seen much of that in the space that you have been in?
This question around safety is really challenging. Like, is somewhere ever a safe space, or can we try to make these spaces safer? Right? Like, there are many variables when it comes to dynamics within the human family. And so in community and people that are connected to each other through ceremony, I've seen interpersonal conflict, and that happens. Conflict is generative. I think it's very important that like we have the opportunity to bring our grievances to each other. In ceremony, I run a pretty tight ship. I don't have any issue like calling a person directly when it's happening. Like everyone knows that they can just whisper in my ear and tell me something's up. We've had that issue before where, you know, sometimes people in a certain body might take up a lot of space, might feel very much entitled to room in the space, and maybe even like pressing boundaries on like, this feels like a sexual advance. Like, we're not here to have a cuddle party during mushroom ceremony. Like, we're here to pray. And some people don't understand the memo because maybe they've never been in this framework before. So as important as it is to have a conversation about how facilitators treat the people that come, is just as important of a conversation as how people know how to arrive in these spaces as well. Yeah. And so this person did not come correct. Someone came to me and was like, this person's making me feel uncomfortable. And like, a stern talking to is not a hard thing to do.
No.
I'm a mom.
Right.
Afraid to give a stern talking.
No.
I got a 4-year-old boy on my hands, okay, who's pushing every boundary every moment of the day. And it's so important to have like a strong, firm hand to be like, you are in our space now. So if you're not going to honor it, you don't get to be here. In my circles, in these years of holding space, 7 years of creating these containers, we've never once had an essay experience at ceremony. It doesn't even come close. We just don't. It's not tolerable. And if it ever did, that would be not tolerated. It's why I like to hold space. It's why I advocate so strongly. We attract a lot of survivors to our circles. We attract a lot of queer people and people of color and people that have been marginalized because they know that I fiercely advocate for these things out in the open and then maintain and sustain that in the healing spaces that we create as well.